What we do know, however, that it was in Barbados that the first commercial production started. Rum was worth its weight in gold then, or rum is worth its weight in gold now. I'm Andre Carey.
And I'm Shane Stewart, and we're the Rum Boys from Hong Kong. Today we're going to go into the background of rum. What we have to say, rum has been so intricate to the development of what we now know as South America, United States, North America. It played an integral part in the development of that part of the world.
Before we go even into that bit of history, we want to go a little further back. I want to tell you a little bit about sugar cane, the plant that we use to make this wonderful product called rum. The sugar cane plant is actually native to Papua New Guinea. So it comes from this side of the planet. It has been grown and planted in India for thousands of years. The Arabs were the first people to introduce it to the rest of the world. And they took those plants and created plantations in Spain, in the Mediterranean to produce sugar. Prior to that, though, one of the first examples of somebody using cane juice or fermented cane juice to create a drink comes again from India. Over 3,000 years ago, they used to make this concoction called surah. And surah was made from mixing fermented cane juice with rice wine and some spices. They used to give it to their warriors.
And that was, I guess, the first sign of Dutch courage.
You bet right. It used to get those warriors all amped up. But the real story of rum comes from this side of the planet. And what we saw is that the Portuguese stole the secret of cultivation and sugar production from the Arabs. And they set up plantations first in the Azores and then in the New World in Brazil. The Spanish did much the same thing, setting up plantations in the Canary Islands. And again, when they created their New World colonies in Puerto Rico and in Cuba, they did the same. Debate continues as to who's the first to plant sugarcane in the New World. But needless to say, by the 1500s, you had all the colonial powers, the British, the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, all planting and growing sugarcane to really good commercial success in the New World. The Portuguese were the first to introduce African slaves into their plantations. They did that first in the Azores and then over into Brazil. And these African slaves were needed simply because the Indians who were indigenous to the region, who the Portuguese had enslaved originally, had this really nasty habit of dying or running away.
So the question was, we're producing sugar. What do we do with all this byproduct, this molasses? Initially, millions of gallons of molasses was dumped into the ocean. But then, some enterprising slaves in Brazil decided to make a drink out of it. So they took the molasses and they fermented it in clay pots. And this produced a drink called cachaco, which is essentially the old way of saying cachaça in Brazil, which is rum.
So soon enough, the plantation owners realized that there could be some commercial value to this thing that the slaves were brewing. And that realization actually coincided with the fact that proper pot stills was starting to be produced. This technology to produce these pot stills had just been perfected. The plantation owners realized that if they could make the rum a lot more palatable, because when you make it in those earthenware pots, it's really harsh, really hard liquid, that they could sell this and sell this on, and they could then use their waste product, which they'd been dumping, and produce something else. The first people to use the pot still is in the Caribbean. It's still a big debate. Everybody claims that they did it first. What we do know, however, that it was in Barbados that the first commercial production started. They were the first ones who decided, this is something that we can sell.
And Barbados, again, developed the oldest known distillery in that part of the world, quickly followed by Jamaica, with the Ray and Nephew Distillery in Jamaica. Now, from there, that rum became so famous and so well regarded that in the United States, well, as we say, the Americas, because they were still a colony of the UK, rum was consumed in vast quantities. So much so that anybody over the age of 15 drank, on average, 6 gallons of rum per year. That's essentially 5 shots a day for every man, woman, and child in America at that time. A massive quantity of rum. Rum was so important in the New World, in America, that the government at the time, the British government, introduced a tax for that rum. And that was a precursor for the American Revolution, because the settlers felt that they were being taxed without representation. Hence the quote,
taxation without representation. A lot of people believe that was related to the Boston Tea Party. No, no, no. That dates back to 1733 when the Molasses Act came into being.
Rum was so popular in the United States at that time that you had over 160 distilleries from New Jersey to Maine. Now, just to give you an idea, the United States is a massive country and that coastline is huge, right? And you had distilleries all up along the coastline. Because one of the quirky things about rum production, and if you look at the history of rum, rum was always produced in countries that had a coastline, a port. Never in country, always coming in. Because that is where they were able to bring products in, grow sugar cane, and from there they made the distilleries. I think to sum up in terms of the popularity of rum, there's no truer indication than during the inauguration of the first president of the United States, George Washington. He specifically asked for a few barrels of aged rum from Barbados. That's how popular it was. That's how highly regarded rum was, more so than whiskey. And the only reason Americans started to drink whiskey was because they wanted to rebel. And they rebelled by no longer buying sugarcane or rum from the Caribbean, and they started to produce whiskey using the grain spirits that were being introduced at the time.
Yeah. It's interesting. In the Americas at the time, rum was considered a safer drink than water, and people actually didn't drink spirits made from grain because they thought they were bad, they were lower quality. Molasses was what you needed to make a spirit from. The thing about rum and the history of the Caribbean, the history of the Americas, was that it's amazing that these small little islands were the scenes or the cause of huge battles in the colonial powers. The French, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese all fought wars over what are essentially small little rocks sitting in the sea. But the sugar trade, the sugar boom was so huge. To give you a sense of the scale of this and the importance of sugar and sugar production to the colonial powers, the British lost more soldiers in Haiti, and Haiti is a French colony, mind you, than they did fighting the American Revolutionary War. They sent more soldiers to Haiti to help the French quell a rebellion than they did to quell their own rebellion in the Americas. The other thing to note that during the time of the American Revolution, the value of trade between England, North America, or the American colonies, the original 13 American colonies, was tiny compared to the trade between England and Jamaica, only one of its colonies in the Caribbean. Jamaican trade at the time was 5 times larger in value than trade from all of the 13 American colonies.
And why is that? Rum and sugar production. But there was a dark side to this venture. And rum became so valuable and the plantations became so profitable that they needed to have workers to enable them to maintain that profitability. And this is where slavery came into play. Rum caused the transportation of over 12 million people from Africa to the Caribbean. The numbers of what were lost on that trip Nobody really knows. But that created the whole triangular trade.
People would take, basically, you would take sugar and molasses to Europe to buy guns, cotton, cloth, and the like. That would be sent to Africa. That trade, those guns, that cloth would be traded in Africa for slaves. Those slaves would be sold in North America and the Caribbean for more sugar and rum. And so you had this basically triangular trade, ships going from each continent, picking up various goods along the way. People got very wealthy from this, and it was unfortunately a very sad time, driven by the profits from sugar and rum. But rather than end on a really gloomy note, one thing to note about rum. Back in the 1700s, there was a time in Europe when rum from Rhode Island, and Rhode Island being one of the American colonies, its rum was considered the best at the time. Rhode Island rum was the equivalent of gold. You could use it as a currency in Europe. So if you had a couple of barrels of Rhode Island rum, you could buy a house. And like we say, you know, rum was worth its weight in gold then, or rum is worth its weight in gold now.